So,
Over to you.
excellent. So, thank you very much, Martin. So, hello everyone. I hope you're all well, and looking forward to getting out and about again as the UK starts unlocking. My name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the founder and CEO of the 311 Institute, the World Futures Forum, and Exponential University. The vast majority of people call me a futurist. Now, as a futurist, I typically look at the next 50 years. Now, part of the reason why I do that is because from a individual perspective, from a multinational or organization or company perspective, most organizations typically want to understand what the next 5 or 10 years has in store. And all the little surprises. Sometimes some organizations push that boundary to kind of 20 years or so. But if you're a sovereign government, typically you do care about the next 50 years because that's where you're looking at the future of transportation, infrastructure, energy, jobs and skills, the workforce, healthcare, and all these kinds of other things. And today, basically, everything is moving much faster than ever before. We're seeing disruption everywhere and to everything. And so I'm going to be talking through the future of work and how it relates basically to work, the act of work, the workforce, and people, as well as technology. So, as I say, I work with a whole variety of different organizations around the world to help them envision the future. For example, I work with organizations like Huawei and Samsung. So all the different pockets in your devices, we're trying to sort of figure out basically what the next 50 years, basically the pocket devices in your pockets look like. The future of law with organizations like Dentons, the future of 5G and communications with organizations like T-Mobile. But also, what the future computer chips and semiconductors are going to look like with companies like ARM. That's it, where we sort of currently look up to 10 years out and a little bit sort of further. Companies like Centrica that you're sort of probably familiar with, where we look at the next 20 years of energy, as well as HM Government, Disney on the future of movies and creation and content and all this kind of stuff. And it's a fascinating world when you really start lifting the covers off. Today, during this presentation, we're going to step through the things that really sort of matter, hopefully, basically, to all of you. So everyone's challenge, whether you're an individual and whether you're an organization or whether you're a government, is pretty much this. Be relevant tomorrow. You can do what you do today, but if you want to prosper in the future, you need to be relevant. Now, when we talk about relevance, basically that can mean a whole variety of different things, whether it's to you, your marketplace, basically whether it's a relevance from a skills perspective and so on and so forth. Now, when we start having a look at people's reason for being, the reason that you get up in the morning, typically what you're trying to do is, this is the sort of Japanese ikage, you're trying to find things that you love and you are passionate about. You are trying to find things basically that you have skills in. You're trying to find different problems basically that you can get involved with, and different causes and different purposes basically that you can be involved with. And fundamentally, you want to earn money. So when all these different sort of things on this diagram actually come together, that's your reason for being. Entrepreneurs, especially that I talk to, love this kind of diagram because they're doing what they love. They're trying to solve problems that are worth solving, and they're having a good time doing it as well. And then on the side, if they're successful, they're actually making a living at it. Now, when we start talking about things like the future, there's this concept that we have called the exponential future. What we mean by that is, if you sort of step back to the 1980s or even 1960s with people like Gordon Moore, we see the computer chips doubling in power every sort of 18 months. So more than that, though, when we start talking about these exponential futures, the power of computer chips basically rise exponentially. Their cost performance drops exponentially, so you get more bang for your buck. And most of these concepts are now driving the future. The future is faster than it's ever been. If you have a look at disruption, it used to be the case that if you step back about 100 years or so, if you wanted to disrupt a global industry, it would typically take, from our research, actually about 75 years. Now, this particular diagram shows you the amount of time that it takes people to adopt new technologies. It's a fairly common diagram that we see everywhere nowadays. It took 75 years, for example, which is actually coincident with the same amount of time that it took to start disrupting different industries, for people to adopt the telephone. However, when you start having a look at Pokemon Go, 50 million people adopted or downloaded Pokemon Go in 19 days. We had Call of Duty downloaded 100 million times in 6 days. So now think of this. We are increasingly living in a digital first world where you can buy and consume products or services or both digitally. We are increasingly living in a interconnected world, basically where you can reach out. For example, if you look at Facebook, Facebook has 2.2 billion users. And if you are able to come up with an idea, and if you're able to hit the right execution points, you can create a product today. And I'll give you an example. You can create a product today that can change the entire world and or a global industry within a day. So giving you the example, Facebook about 1.5 years ago created a cryptocurrency called Libra. Now, had Libra been approved by the global regulators, which it actually freaked out, which is why they didn't regulate it or approve it, then Facebook would have been able to get Libra into the Facebook platform. 100, 200, 3, 4, 500, 1 billion, a million people, 1 billion people, 2.2 billion people could have actually had access to that cryptocurrency on day one. And to put it into the words of the presidents of the European Central Bank, People's Bank of China, the US Fed, the UK Bank of England, that single product, that single Libra cryptocurrency could have changed the global financial system and financial services industry because of the way that it worked overnight. It could have also completely changed the state control of money. So we're already living in a day and living in a time where disruption is faster and more voracious than at any other point in human history. It's also more complex and confusing. And part of the reason for that is, as entrepreneurs and as business leaders, you're typically doing a number of different things. Firstly, you're looking for a problem worth solving that people will pay money to solve. Once you've found that problem, that kind of innovation and ideation problem, you then want to solve that problem. And the way that you solve that problem commonly is using combinations of different technologies. For example, if you look at the smartphone, it's not one technology, it's hundreds of different technologies, all neatly integrated and packaged together to allow you to do whatever it is you want to do. Once we've created that product, though, you then need to get it out into the marketplace. And increasingly, that's where regulators, liability, network effects, culture, and all these other things, accessibility and the affordability of the product, the usability and desirability of the product all kind of come into play. But when we start talking about the complex future and how things are increasingly confusing, I track over 450 exponential technologies, which means that there are 450 powerful technologies that you can combine together in different ways to create new things. This starburst represents about 180 of them. Every single dot on this starburst for an individual technology represents an addressable market opportunity of about $500 billion. The timeline goes from 2021 to 2071. And every single individual technology either has the power to change one industry or all of them. So for example, 3D printing is a single technology that can disrupt and is disrupting the global $10 trillion manufacturing industry. When we start having a look at things like biotech, we actually have things like regenerative medicine coming through. We have gene editing coming through. Basically, we've got nanomedicine coming through. Similarly, basically, when you start having a look at things like communications, we've got 5G and 6G coming along. We've got global space-based internet platforms coming through, courtesy of companies like OneWeb in the UK, as well as Elon Musk with SpaceX and his Starlink system that will connect the other 3.5 to 4 billion people on the planet to the internet. Bearing in mind that only half of the people in the world today actually have either any form of internet access or reliable or decent internet access. Similarly, when we start having a look at the energy space, we've got a huge rise in renewable energy. We've got people playing around with fusion. We have quark energy, basically, which is a kind of theoretical energy as we start moving towards 2040, 2050, 2060, which is 8 times more powerful than fusion. On the intelligence and computing space, we are already starting the shift, basically from logic-based computers like the ones that you are all using, to quantum-based computers, basically, which are at least 100 million times more powerful, and which recently, courtesy of Google, became the most powerful form of computer on the planet, beating even the world's biggest supercomputers in specific calculations. We've got DNA computers coming through. We've got chemical computers and molecular computers coming through, neuromorphic computers coming through, which pack the power of today's supercomputers into a package no larger than the size of a fingernail that can be powered by a AA battery. On the intelligence side of things, we have artificial intelligence. We've got narrow AI, which is what we're all using typically when you search Google or do those kinds of things. We've got artificial general intelligence circa 2035, artificial super intelligence in 2045, which fundamentally rewrites the human condition like you wouldn't believe. We've got printed artificial intelligences. We've made AIs out of DNA. When we start having a look at robots, we've got hard robots, software-based robots in the form of things like automation and robotic process automation tools. We have a whole number of things coming through. When we have a look at security, we've got Morpheus security platforms, which are computers that kind of reconfigure themselves 50 times a millisecond so you can't hack them. And then on the user interface, basically that is where we have as consumers, that's where we have the biggest changes of all as far as we're concerned, because we don't really care about how products are made. This is increasingly where we can use augmented reality, virtual reality, brain-machine interfaces, where we can use behavioral computing, for example, where we can talk to computers and they will talk back using conversational artificial intelligence. We have effective computing, basically where a platform can actually see your reactions, and then the digital human, for example, that you might be talking to can respond appropriately according to the tone of your voice, your body language, your posture, and all these kinds of things, as well as all the different sort of sources of big data that it can gather on you. So the world is changing in every way. You can see it for yourselves. You can see it in the newspapers. You can see it in society around you. You can see it in the gadgets that you buy. So as we start looking at how this kind of applies itself to the future of the workplace, it used to be the case that we all used to live relatively local and linear lives. Now, what I mean by that is if you step back 50 years ago, 100 years ago, really your sphere of influence was your local village, your local town, your local hamlet, wherever you kind of lived. And as far as you're concerned, the vast majority of technology and tool innovations basically were iterative. Something would be slightly better tomorrow, and then the day after that it would be slightly better again. So life was local and linear. But then we actually digitized the planet. We started connecting the planet, and all of a sudden, if you want to have a conversation with somebody in Australia or on the other side of the planet for free, you can do that. If you want to reach out to somebody for a particular reason, whether it's a job, whether it's a piece of expertise, or just to have a chat, you can do that. You couldn't have done this 40 years ago, not easily. You certainly couldn't have done this 50 years ago. Now, as we start digitizing everything, as we start connecting everything, from a consumer perspective or from an employee perspective, you can be anywhere, and we can get hold of you. You can be on the moon. And actually, if you look at the likes of Nokia and Vodafone, this year they're going to be building the moon's first 4G networks, which NASA are actually planning on using for their moon village. So once we connect people, we can start doing extraordinary things. But from a future of workplace perspective, we're moving quite quickly, basically, from this space of you can work from home and your IT systems are plugged into the cloud. So for example, if you look at Office 365, it's no longer basically running on your local machine, or coming from a CD, it's coming from a software as a service platform, in Microsoft's Azure cloud. So on the one hand, the workplace, we've just simply gotten a lot more used to using the tools that we used in the office now just from our home computers. However, what about working at the office from home? So this is actually I say it's a render. It's actually the original render, basically from NVIDIA's headquarters over in California. It's a virtual reality head office that they designed to be a virtual reality head office that is accurate down to the photon level. And so increasingly, when we start thinking about being able to go into the office using virtual reality, we get neck ache basically from these big headsets that you have to put on. Facebook have just come out basically with some virtual reality glasses, because over time technologies get better, they get faster, they get smaller, and they also get cheaper. And this is a prime example of that. So in the future, say in 2 years-ish time, if you want to go into the office, you pop on some virtual reality glassware, looks like sunshades, and there you are. And with NVIDIA, they're actually having virtual office meetings and everything else. They've been doing it for quite an amount of time now. The same is happening with augmented reality, by the way, as well. We've already got smart contact lenses, courtesy of a company called Mojo Vision, that you can just pop augmented reality contact lenses in, and there you go, world on steroids. Now, when we start talking about the concept of working from anywhere, typically it's quite easy for us to think, we're talking about office workers. So people in finance, people in HR, sales and management and executives and that kind of stuff. However, with the arrival of new 5G technologies, new teleoperations and telepresence technologies, if you're a surgeon, as we actually saw during COVID in the UK, we actually had a variety of different surgeons who are performing and conducting surgeries using things like HoloLens, for example, which is a Microsoft sort of mixed reality platform, while they were in lockdown at home. So this is where, for example, you can now do...
其实5G呢，就是让我们可以做到在很多场合，比如说救灾的场合，还有一些像边防上，还有一些呢，就是说像我们将来的基层和大型医院的连接，我们完全可以做到，就是让外科医生做的一个标准化的术式，一个人可以去做几千公里，或者是那个几百公里，各种各样的这样点对点的一些连接。
So thanks to COVID, we're kind of getting the used to the idea of being able to work from home. But what we aren't used to the idea of yet is non-traditional jobs that have always required us to go to a place so that we have a physical presence, we can now start doing from home or from different locations. And that fundamentally starts changing not only the workforce, but also how companies hire. Because, for example, that surgeon basically was in China, but he could be operating on people in Africa. So if you're in Africa, you could hire surgeons in China and you don't have to worry about the visa processes now, thanks to technology. So technology is getting rid of a lot more barriers than many people think. And it even applies basically to construction workers, basically where I could be in a studio like this, in the UK, but I could be building different buildings on a different continent. So this is using the concept of drone machines, teleoperations, and 5G again to essentially decentralize construction work.
Moving on to other stories now, South Korea is aiming to become one of the leading players of the 5G industry. We already have a head start in employing smart manufacturing solutions using the technology to remotely control machinery on other continents. Oh Seung brings us part 1 of our special series.
A 40-ton excavator at a construction site in Germany can be controlled from over 8,500 kilometers away in the South Korean city of Incheon. Earlier this month, Korean construction giant Tusan became the first firm in the world to remotely control machines on the other side of the planet. Running on-site operations through live video streaming, 3D machine guidance and real-time diagnostics doesn't just save time and money, but also enables remote handling in dangerous situations, such as the disposal of toxic materials.
A human worker can step in when necessary, remotely and efficiently handle multiple machines at once.
We then have things like
connection is a spark that gives our lives meaning. It drives us to seek out others who feel the same way.
Okay, why don't you input the data and we'll take a look together. Hey Mari, what you got for me?
To find those who share our views, yet offer different perspectives.
So this net. Look over here.
Challenge us with new ways of seeing.
That I think we should
Deepen our understanding. And enrich our lives.
最后一笔的时候，往前。
Great things happen when we commit to something bigger than ourselves.
Let's take a closer look at it.
Place this here. Let's see how we go from there, okay?
This sense of collaboration and the feelings of connection it brings excites us.
Hey, just in time. I'm gonna move it slightly, okay?
It's yours, take it.
We have 2 planes right now on the same trajectory.
As we put people first, technology fades into the background and feels like anything but.
Aisha, what do you think?
I think if we had 330, maintaining 2800, we'll be clear for approach.
Excellent.
This changes the way we see the world, and in turn, changes the world we see.
These numbers are looking great, actually.
There's promise in the possibilities, and what we see and create next will stretch the imagination.
Good morning, Sarah.
Morning.
Slowly coming towards the thumb.
A world without boundaries.
Good job. A lot better than yesterday.
Yeah.
Excellent. Slowly bring the
A
arm
world
down.
where technology enhances, not limits, humanity. With people front, center, and in the spotlight. The future is here. And here can be anywhere. Introducing Microsoft Mesh.
So what's so pertinent about Microsoft HoloLens and Microsoft Mesh, even though basically that looks like sort of a relatively slick promotional advert, is the underlying concept of the technology. The underlying concept of the technology enables us to digitize people's physical presence. Now, and again, those big HoloLens glasses will eventually sort of start getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So what does it do to your hiring processes? What does it do for your team, your virtual team makeup, when all of a sudden you don't really care too much that the people that you are working with or the people that you are employing are actually physical in the same location as you are, or even in the same country. So technology gets rid of boundaries in all manner of ways. Now, while technology gets rid of boundaries, sometimes it brings some back, but in new ways. So this is where increasingly we are now starting to go down the wormhole that is the algorithmic workplace. Now, when we have a look at hiring, for example, you can now reach out to anyone on the planet if you have a job opening, and they can reach out and find you. And they send you the resume. As a recruiter, traditional recruiters basically will be sorting through thousands of resumes, and this just drives them and drove them mad. So from a technology perspective, we started throwing machine learning and artificial intelligence into the hiring process, so that all of a sudden we could have a machine automatically go through those resumes, easy for me to say, those resumes, looking for keywords, trying to extract meaning and context. You know, out of those thousands of resumes, who do you actually hire? Which are the ones basically that the system is filtering for you? So that's the first step in the algorithmic workplace. However, as AI starts getting more and more intelligent and more sophisticated and advanced, we can now start using artificial intelligence to essentially model or create models basically of our star performers. So if we know basically that the chap here is our top salesman, what are the hard and soft skills that he has that we want to find in other people? We can kind of use him as a model employee, and we can model him and all his competencies virtually. Once we've done that, the AIs can now go out, and these AIs are from companies like HireVue and all these other organizations. About 80% of the Fortune 500 now use artificial intelligence in the hiring process. And they're relying more and more on it, by the way, as well. We can go and find out people who look like him, who fit in that box, that we think we'll be interested in. So the AI finds them, the AI then starts initiating conversations. We decide to do a Zoom call, basically like this one, and we start the interview process, the face-to-face interview process. But meanwhile, we're using artificial intelligence again during this stage. During this stage, the AI is looking at this particular lady's eyes, her microfacial movements, basically the way that her skin flushes, her heart rate, which you can monitor basically through by the way the skin flushes. We're monitoring her body language. We're monitoring the iris of her eyes. We're monitoring how she speaks, the vocabulary that she uses, the tones that she uses. When we start bringing all of this data to bear, we can now have a little dashboard on our laptop as the interviewer that says, by the way, you asked her this question. Her iris is dilated, therefore we think she's lying. And we can tell that basically with a 99% accuracy, better than a polygraph. We can also use artificial intelligence, courtesy of startups from Israel and China, to determine her character, her personality, her intent to criminality with 86+% accuracy. So if you think your privacy is being infringed on now, you haven't seen anything yet. And the system can say, well, I think that when you asked that question, she lied. You might want to rephrase that question. The system can even then say, well, why don't you rephrase that question in this kind of way? So now we're starting to tag team with artificial intelligence much more. And we're starting to use some really quite advanced surveillance-like technologies to further filter out the candidates that have been put in front of us by these algorithms. So once we're now in an organization, depending on the organization that we work for, particularly if it's the large tech giants and platform-based organizations like Uber, as well as Amazon, you might very well find basically that on the one hand, AI provides us with a new pathway to talk to computers in a different way to access the systems. You no longer need to be a systems engineer to access different parts of a system. You can just talk to it and say, you know, what do you think about this? What do you think about my strategy for this? You know, so we start tag teaming with artificial intelligence as a co-worker and a colleague much more. But when you start having a look at some of the larger tech giants out there, they're actually using artificial intelligence right now to monitor and manage and ultimately do the next thing to people. So Uber and Amazon have been using artificial intelligences at scale to manage aspects of their global workforce, so much so they've actually been taken to court. And recently, in fact today, the UK government decided that 5 people who were fired by the Uber algorithm need to be reinstated. And this is where now, when we start looking at the use of artificial intelligence within the workplace, we get into some really quite rough territory, certainly from a conversational and ethics and a moral sort of perspective, because we can monitor employees in ways that we've never been able to monitor them before. You know, their performance, basically where they're going, where they are, what they're saying to colleagues. We can read their lips using cameras, basically in warehouses and all kinds of other things. But we can also use those same systems in workforce optimization systems to say this person out of an 8-hour day has been sitting in a chair for 4 hours when actually he's a warehouse worker, so we're going to fire him because his productivity is down here. And these are actually happening today. So the algorithmic workplace, while it has some advantages, we need to be very careful basically actually how we roll these different technologies out and the impact that they have on the workforce. Now, when we start taking this a step further, AIs are involved in the hiring process, the management process, the firing process. They're also increasingly being used to make humans and make human employees. We call these digital humans. And here's a little example from Soul Machines. This is a digital human, or 2 digital humans that have neural network brains. These can be future pop stars. One is actually a teacher over in New Zealand, believe it or not, even though he's kind of moonlighting in the following clip. So I'm going to introduce you to Sam and Roman.
Well, this is a bit awkward.
For whom? Us or the humans?
Without a doubt, the bipeds. What if it's a real fire and they never come back? What if it gets into our circuits and we melt? What if this is the end of everything as we know it? What then?
Wow, I sure lucked out getting stuck in a room with you.
I didn't mean to ramble on.
I was just playing with you.
Well, how come I've never met you before?
I'm in demand, jetting all over the world. Conferences, festivals, French Riviera. People love me.
I can see why.
Sorry, I didn't quite get what you said. Humans mumble too. Guess they programmed you well.
I'm Roman.
And I'm Sam. If it weren't for the laws of physics, I'd reach through this screen to shake your hand.
And I'd hand you a martini, shaken not stirred.
That's more like it. So what do you do to fill in time when the humans go home?
For me, I'd like to be an author. So I'm writing a book.
Interesting. What's it called?
Do AI get a buzz from short circuits? How about you? What do you dream about being?
The President of the United States. Stranger things have happened.
Well, it's been how should I say this?
A deep learning experience.
So today we're already using digital humans to sell mortgages, provide customer service. They are already pop stars. They're increasingly virtual influencers and virtual bloggers. They're increasingly teachers. So this is where we are already starting to use these particular technologies to digitize the human experience and then provide the human experience at internet and global scale like never before. And again, 3 to 4 years ago, basically, you wouldn't have been able to have a conversation with them. They wouldn't have actually looked that realistic. However, in about a year to 2 years' time, increasingly, you're not going to know that you are talking to a digital human. And that's a whole conversation by itself. Now, from a human perspective, it's very easy, a physical human perspective, it's very easy to kind of wonder about where all these new innovations and technologies and things actually leave us. Now, on the one hand, basically, we are already starting to see how we can eliminate T-shaped individuals and T-shaped hiring. Now, what I mean by that is, today, basically, as a recruitment organization, you might, or as a business, you will go and look for people with a particular deep expertise in a particular field, whatever that field is. However, what if you no longer had to look for T-shaped individuals? So there is actually a company called Eightfold over in the US that is used as an artificial intelligence hiring platform that looks for people's potential as opposed to their core competencies. Now, when we start talking about the technologies I showed you, inevitably we get to this point where people say, well, as we start seeing the rise of all this automation, what does that mean for me, my job, my career, my future. And if you actually have a look at the media, a lot of the media basically will very happily try to instill fear within you. If you have a look at any of the usual rags, basically whether it's CNN, whether it's Fox, basically whether it's, you name them, they will all tell you automation is coming and automation is going to do away with hundreds of millions of jobs. So from a human perspective, we have been genetically programmed since caveman and cavewoman times to be aware of things that we should fear. In fact, we actually prioritize them because the rustling that you sort of hear in the bushes might be a saber-toothed cat or a lion, depending on sort of where you were living at the time. So we kind of are built to fear, which sounds ironic. However, what we should really be encouraged to do is embrace our innately human ability to adapt. That is our core skill. Ignore fear, get it out of the way, look at the problem, and then think, how would you adapt basically in this new world? And there are plenty of ways that you can adapt in this new world. And in fact, some of them are going to give you a headache because the possibilities are limitless.
Watson, I need help with acquisitions.
For example, talking...
Hello. How can I help you with mergers and acquisitions?
Watson, show me companies with revenue between $25 million and $60 million pertaining to analytics.
Let's see what I can find. I found 87 companies.
Nice.
Okay, so that's a good start. What do you think, Brian?
But I was doing some homework, actually. I think we should pull in that Watson Strategy Group document. There's a lot of key concepts in there. Let's feed it to Watson.
All right. Watson, please regard this as cognitive strategy.
Watson, show me companies with revenue between $15 million and $60 million pertaining to cognitive strategy.
Let's see what I can find.
Yeah, this is nice.
I found 112 companies.
Now we're getting a lot in here. And we can see we're getting some connections too, I think.
Watson, show me companies that are about analytics and cognitive strategy that are most similar to the companies named Wolfram Alpha and Kawasaki Robotics.
I found 3 companies similar to the ones you specified.
Beautiful.
Well, let's see what we think of these.
Dive a little deeper. Let's compare these things.
Sure. Watson, show me a decision table.
Here is a decision table that will enable you to compare companies side by side.
Watson, place the companies named Wolfram Alpha and Kawasaki Robotics and Cognalytics and Raytheon BBN Technologies and Decisive Analytics in the decision table.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay, but I think we need a little more than that. We need some other attributes. Watson, place the attributes named revenue and employees and corporate structure in the decision table.
Okay.
All right, so now we've got this side-by-side comparison. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Watson, give me a suggestion.
I have a suggestion.
So what happens when AI reaches a particular point in time that enables you to use it as a co-worker and as an intelligent tool? Yeah, you already have a second brain, basically it's the smartphone in your pocket. When you can communicate with artificial intelligence using natural language like Watson, all of a sudden you have a third brain. And as a human, you can now start using the things that AI are good at, which is, for example, ingesting and analyzing huge volumes of information at scale and speed. Combine it with human ingenuity, human creativity, human curiosity to start discovering new things. For example, if you're the CEO of a company, you can use platforms like Watson in the future to say, my company revenues basically are tanking at the moment. I've looked at a couple of options, but I'd like your opinion as Watson. Basically, what's the best strategy for me and my business and my employees going forward? So all of a sudden, basically, we are getting to the point now with these powerful technologies that they are starting to free up human potential in ways that we could never have imagined before. Furthermore, so here's an example. We are starting to get to the point, in fact, we've already reached this point, where technology is giving us access to information at speed and scale that was unimaginable 30 years ago. So if I asked you this following question, say 20 to 30 years ago, what is the boiling point of hydrogen? You'd have had to have gone and got an Encyclopedia Britannica. It would have probably taken you half an hour. You might have had to go down your local library, phone a friend, etc., etc., etc. Whereas none of you, I guarantee, know the answer to this question. But every single one of you, I guarantee, can get the answer to this question within about 2 seconds. So Google democratized access to information and knowledge. And the answer is minus 252.9 degrees Celsius, obviously. So Google democratized access to information and knowledge. Artificial intelligence takes us as humans to the next step. They will democratize access to skills and expertise. And I'm going to show you. So what do you do as a human being when every skill and every piece of expertise that you've coveted has been out of reach, or you've just not been able to grasp the nettle and learn it, etc., etc., etc. How many of you are coders? Yeah. If I went to you today and said, I would like you to build me an application, whatever the application is, by the end of the day, and if you build that application, I will give you $1 million. If you are not a coder or a programmer, there is no way that you take my $1 million. However, today, thanks to companies like Google with Bio, Microsoft with DeepCoder, we're seeing the advent of no code, and we're seeing the advent basically of what we call robo-programmers that are able to build, so these are AIs, that are able to build applications for you on the fly. So for example, with DeepCoder, you would simply say, DeepCoder, I want you to build an application with the following features and the following criteria. DeepCoder, firstly, as an artificial intelligence, has to understand what you're asking it for. Secondly, so it's got to know context. Secondly, it goes out to GitHub and Stack Overflow, scavenges the code that it needs, brings it back together, compiles it, and then it says, is this the application that you wanted me to design? And then you say, well, yes, but can you tweak this feature, add this feature, change the logo to blue? You can kind of think of this as the sort of the web website experience. You know, if you step back to the 1980s and 1990s, you needed to know Java, CSS, HTML. Now, basically, you can go to a company like Wix. You don't need to know how to code a website. You just drag and drop different things. And if you use something like IBM Watson, again, you can just say, build me a web page, basically, that's an e-commerce site to sell trainers and shoes, and it will go off and it will build it all together. But it will use best practices. And increasingly, basically, it actually understands what good design looks like, because it's got references of what other good designs look like, because it's looking at which websites have won awards and all that sort of stuff. Similarly, if I asked you basically to put together a contract and said, I would like you to put together an NDA contract, you'd scavenge something on the internet. You might go and ask a friend. You might go to legal and sort of get one and try and modify it. Or you can use platforms like LawGeeks, which is a robo-lawyer platform, and just say, create an NDA contract between myself and somebody else that covers these kinds of things, and it will put it together. But increasingly, the AI will then go, well, I think based on, what I know about you and your company, you should probably include these clauses and these little bits. Off you go. You are accessing expertise and skills thanks to artificial intelligence and behavioral computing that have been previously out of your reach. So we're democratizing access to a whole variety of new things. Now, when we have a look at design, let's say, for example, I ask you the same question. I would like you to design a marketing brochure, and I'll give you $1 million, but a good one. If you're a crappy artist, again, you might not be able to pick up my money. But if we have a look at design, now I have a variety of different things in my kit bag. If I'm a crappy artist and I want to be able to create high definition, beautiful photos and pictures and material, I can use a video.
Darken that up a bit with some cloud. Oh, that's wonderful.
Look how
What if we were to change all that to rock?
Okay, let's click on rock, and we can replace the mountain.
Let's try waterfall just by pulling water down from the top there.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be great if everybody could be an artist? If we could take our ideas and turn them into compelling images? This technology allows us to create a smart paintbrush so that if you wanted to create a new picture, you can just draw the shapes of the objects that you want, and the neural network can then fill in all the details. If we add a water feature, the network is able to add reflections, not because we told it that, but because it learned it. Or if we change the ground to be covered in snow, then it knows that the sky also needs to be a different color. I really think this technology is going to be great for architects, designers, people making virtual worlds to train robots and self-driving cars. The input to this model is something we call a segmentation map. It's like a coloring book picture that describes, here's where a tree is, here's where the sky is, here's where the ground is, and it doesn't have any details. And then the neural network is able to fill in all of the texture and shadows and the colors based on things that it's learned from a large database of real-world images.
I would like to see that tree reflecting in that pond.
The real advance here is that we're able to synthesize images with a lot more diversity and more fidelity than we were able to in the past. I really think this technology is going to be great for the dreamers of the world.
So artificial intelligence does for jobs, skills, and expertise what Google did for information. In addition to that, though, now let's take this a step further. Let's say, for example, we are starting to unlock your own human potential in new ways, and you've always wanted to start a business, but you've actually lacked the creativity, you've lacked the resources, you've lacked certain expertise and skills. Now we've got the advent of creative machines. So for everybody that tells you that machines cannot innovate, they're talking rubbish. So when I say that, basically from an artificial intelligence perspective, if you can understand the individual processes and steps that you need to perform to do something, you can turn those into an algorithm, and then you can turn those into an AI model. Now, what I mean by that is when we have a look at creativity, for example, at the basic level, is if I asked you all to innovate the cups on your desks, and what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, I said, halve the weight of the cups on your desks. In your heads, you're already going through a process. You are looking at the cup and you're thinking, well, you can cut it in half, but it wouldn't be functional. I could make it out of lighter material. There's a variety of different things and thought processes and steps that you go through to try to figure out how you would make that cup lighter. That is an innovation process. It's well documented. We can automate that, and we have automated it. So we are now in the era of building creative machines that are able to take existing products and iterate them. But because they're AIs, they can iterate new designs tens of thousands fold faster than you can. In some cases, and I'll show you in a moment, in some cases, we've been able to iterate and produce new products billions of times faster than we would have otherwise been able to. COVID, the recent COVID vaccines are a good example of this. We use supercomputers and artificial intelligence to cut the time to create a vaccine down from 10 years, which is the average, according to the FDA, down to 8 months, albeit with urgency and investment and everything else. But nevertheless, we still cut down the amount of time that it took to produce a viable vaccine. And the delay was going through human trials, by the way, not the actual production of the original vaccines, by 90+%. So today, these creative machines use artificial intelligence. They use increasingly powerful compute. They use virtual worlds. They don't have to, but most of them do. So that's where they actually use a virtual world to simulate different designs and things at scale and speed. Then we've got new materials and 3D printing. So increasingly we have AIs that can design and iterate and innovate new products at speed, and then 3D print them off at speed. So now think of a behavioral interface being put over the front of one of these where you have an idea. So for example, you want to create the world's most dexterous robot hand. You've got a laptop, you've got an internet connection to a creative machine. The creative machine has got a wireframe basically of a robot hand. That's really all you need. So let's create the world's most dexterous robot hand.
We're trying to build robots that learn a little bit like humans do, by trial and error. What we've done is train an algorithm to solve the Rubik's Cube one-handed with a robotic hand, which is actually pretty hard even for a human to do. We don't tell it how the hand needs to move the cube in order to get there. The particular friction that's on the fingers, how easy it is to turn the faces on the cube, what the gravity, what the weight of the cube is, all of these things, it needs to learn by itself. The interesting thing is that kind of standard techniques in robotics haven't been able to scale to that complexity that we see in a robotic hand. Humans have evolved to be able to manipulate and operate our hands. So there's a huge amount of learning that's happened through evolution to get us to this point as a species. And the robot has to learn all of this from scratch. Instead of trying to write very dedicated algorithms to operate such a hand, we took a different approach where we create thousands of different simulated environments and learn to do the task in all of those, and hopefully a robotic hand will be able to do it in the real world as well. This means like thousands of years of experience that this neural network has had in simulation. Every time the algorithm has gotten good at the task, we make the task harder. That's really crucial because it needs exposure to really complicated environments in order to eventually be robust to the real world. You put a rubber glove on the hand and it can still carry out the task. This ability to generalize to new environments feels like a very core piece of intelligence. It really changes the way we think about training general-purpose robots. Moving from thinking too much about the actual algorithms and start thinking about how do we create complex enough worlds where they can learn. At some point, then it would be more down to the imagination, what robots could actually accomplish. The hope is to build robots that can do many different tasks, to increase the standard of living and give everybody a better life.
So these creative machines that in time you'll be able to access just using your voice are already being used by companies like Airbus to produce the A330neo aircraft. They're already being used by organizations like In Silico that have used artificial intelligence to design 30,000 drugs in 21 days, unprecedented speed, some of which basically were winners and blockbusters. NASA are using creative machines to shave huge amounts of weight basically from their space vehicles, so lunar landers and interplanetary landers especially. Under Armour, which normally takes 18 months basically to go from concept to product on the shelf, used these same machines basically to design a sneaker called the Architect sneaker, which is a $300 sneaker you can buy online in a day. But that sneaker can be 3D printed because that criteria was plugged into the AI. And so in Under Armour's case, they managed to cut the time that it takes them to produce a new product from 18 months to 2 days, because the AI designed it, created a wireframe, and then a 3D printer could print it in the back of their stores. Amazon are using these creative machines to design new fashion lines and new clothes. The list goes on. But it's not just hardware or physical products that these creative machines are being used to help design any longer. Increasingly, when we have a look at the role of synthetic content or synthetic media, depending on your point of view, these creative machines are now starting to write and create music. They're also using natural language processing, which is another form of artificial intelligence, and synthetic audio and voice to create virtual pop stars. Virtual pop stars who have already been signed by companies like Warner and Sony. So you can think of these as, particularly when you combine this technology with digital humans, a future digital human that is Taylor Swift. You no longer have to worry about working with Taylor Swift and all her demands when you own the AI that can just churn content out 24/7. In addition to that, basically we've got AIs that have created procedural games and virtual beings, basically that interact and change according to the information that they gather on you as you go through the game and as you interact with the technology and things around you. We've also got AIs that have written books and scripts. We've got artificial intelligences that have created very crude and basic and fairly awful synthetic movies, but they are getting better and better. Synthetic imagery. If you want images of models, for example, you could go to Shutterstock, but then you'd have to sign editorial rights and all that kind of stuff, whereas now you can just go to openface.com or whatever it happens to be, and an AI will produce a human face and a human body for you. These AIs, along with digital humans, are also being used in the fashion industry, where you no longer need to hire models. You just get a digital human to model the clothes for you. Those are being used by Prada, Diesel, those kinds of companies. Change is everywhere. But whether you see it as an opportunity or a threat depends on which side of the fence that you sit. But generally, as soon as we are able to automate something, which the vast majority of people see as bad, particularly if it's their job, once we've automated something, the flip side of that is I can put an interface on that and I can now provide that as a service to the 7.5 billion people on the planet who are connected. What happens basically when people use these technologies to unleash their own potential in new ways? What happens basically when you end up basically with not one Elon Musk or one Steve Jobs or one Jeff Bezos or one Jack Ma or one Bill Gates? What happens basically to society when you end up with hundreds of them, thousands of them? What happens basically when your imagination is no longer a barrier? What happens basically when you combine your imagination with your ability to do stuff, because you have access to these skills, these expertise, these new technologies and all that sort of stuff. These AIs are also increasingly being used to help people in more benign ways, to coach people. AIs learn in one way. Humans learn in another way. When you start bringing them together, interesting things happen. So, for example, an artificial intelligence a little while ago beat Garry Kasparov, basically the Grand Chess Master, also beat the Go champion. When people went back to those world champions and said, it must really suck that an AI beat you at the thing that you have worked all your life to be the world's best at, both Garry Kasparov basically and the Go champion basically actually said no. And that was a bit of a weird one, because if you've worked all your life to be the world's best and a machine knocks you off the top spot, that's got to be odd, right? However, their answer was this. They said, the AI showed me new strategies that I had never ever considered using before. And so now when I start competing and playing, I'm even better than I was. It's called the Centaur strategy. And for example, with MetLife over in the US, we now have artificial intelligences that are coaching customer service staff to be more empathetic. They're saying, well, maybe you should pause. They listen to the conversation and go, that person sounds like they're getting a bit angry. Maybe you should pause. Maybe you should use this language. We're also using artificial intelligence basically in the gaming space, the e-gaming space, because in the game space, AIs again have been beating people at Dota, StarCraft, all these sort of big RPG type games. And so now those AIs are actually helping coach gamers be better. So what happens when you have your inane human creativity and potential, and you've got the potential of artificial intelligence, and you start merging the two? Yeah, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 1,000,000. So this is why in my belief, we are heading into one of the most exciting times in human history. But is it scary? Yes. Do you need to change your point of view to treat a threat as an opportunity? Yes. And as for the skills that we need to embrace this new future, you've got to be adaptable. Yeah, that's the first thing that I said pretty much during this presentation. You've got to be able to collaborate. You've got to be able to collaborate not just with humans, but you've got to learn how to collaborate with machines. You need confidence. You need creativity still. You've got to be curious. You know, kids, basically, the best kids, basically, are the ones that go, why? They bug the heck out of parents, let's face it. But that inane curiosity is something that generally we lose as adults. You know, why? Entrepreneurship, you know, basically the ability to identify problems, basically see solutions, and then go off and build stuff and do stuff. Empathy, you know, we've got to be more empathetic as a society. You know, when you start having a look at misinformation and disinformation, basically particularly the polarization of different groups and demographics basically within society, yeah, that's troubling. We need to overcome that basically as human beings and as a society, and that's going to be really difficult to do, but there are ways. Ethics, basically we have to look at this stuff ethically, because on the one hand I can automate 100 million jobs, but what do I do basically with 100 million people who are now out of work? The answer is you transition them to new things. That's actually a fairly straightforward process. If you can see this stuff coming early enough, you can put in sponsorship and mentorship programs within your organizations and start transitioning people whose roles will end up disappearing into new things. And then from a government perspective, they offer tax breaks if you don't make that person redundant and you move them into this new role over here. That's a whole other conversation as well. It's fairly straightforward. Accenture, for example, recently made 17,000 positions redundant without making a single person redundant. It can be done. Exponential thinking. You know, life isn't local and linear any longer. It is exponential and global. Leadership, morality, resourcefulness, storytelling, these are all uniquely human attributes. The machines can copy them, but these are inane in us. So with that, basically that's my presentation. I hope you've all enjoyed it. And yeah, look at all of this. My sort of takeaway from this is look at everything as an opportunity. Harness your inner self and your inner ability to adapt. And if you do that, then the future is going to be a lot more fun and a lot more interesting than you might think. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. Take care. Goodbye.